So imagine being told that staring at the color green is like a highly specific medical prescription.
Right, just staring at it.
Yeah. Or that the decision to, take a pill for a headache is actually the subject of this profound theological debate.
Which is something we just don't even think about today?
Not at all. And then there's the really wild stuff like you absolutely must avoid eating yellow frogs, not just because they might be poisonous, but because they'll allegedly cause your teeth to just fall out.
And subject you to a fatal fluid discharge.
Ugh, yes, a deeply terrifying fatal fluid discharge. So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are opening up this incredibly rich 8th century Islamic medical text for you.
And it is just a completely fascinating document.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because their pharmacy includes, well, everything from structured daily prayer to like observing the migration patterns of eagles.
Yeah, it intricately weaves together theology, early empirical science, anatomical theory, and just everyday health practices.
Into something that is entirely foreign to how we view healthcare right now.
Oh, completely foreign. I mean, it forces us to completely reevaluate the boundaries we've drawn around modern medicine.
Because we love our compartments.
Exactly. We are so accustomed to this rigid system of compartmentalization. Like, you go to a mechanic for your car, right?
Right.
A priest or a therapist for your soul, and then a physician for your physical body.
Everything in its own little box.
Yes. But the text we're examining today, it envisions this ultimate holistic lifestyle, a framework where your faith, physical medicine, the natural world, and even the movement of the cosmos are all inextricably connected.
All one big thing.
Right. In this framework, the human body isn't viewed as this isolated biological machine. It's literally a microcosm of the entire universe.
So our mission for you, the listener, in this deep dive is to extract all this wisdom. The historical medical practices, the philosophical insights about the human body from these sources, to show you how these early scholars viewed the very act of healing.
And to really grasp this, we sort of have to start with the foundational premise of the text.
Which sounds incredibly simple on its face.
Right. It says the principal aim of medicine is just to preserve health and prevent its absence.
Which, yeah, sounds obvious.
It does, but beneath that simplicity is an entire architectural blueprint for human existence. It's the absolute bedrock of their medical philosophy.
And it's immediately paired with this foundational hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad that sets the tone for literally everything that follows.
Yes, the text quotes, "For every disease there is a remedy, and when the remedy is made apparent, then the disease is cured by the permission of Allah the Almighty."
Which, I mean, that singular phrase is kind of a revolution in how a human being interacts with illness.
Especially when you contextualize it within the ancient world.
Right. So if we look at the overarching philosophy here, I think it's best described as an operating system.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, like in modern tech terms, theology is the source code, right?
Yeah.
And physical medicine is just the user interface.
They're different expressions of the exact same underlying logic.
Exactly. Taking medicine, trusting in a higher power, watching a fox eat some grass. These aren't separate disciplines for them. They're interlocking lines of code running the program of human well-being.
And the operating system analogy is highly effective here because it really highlights the active nature of this worldview.
Active as opposed to...
As opposed to fatalistic. Consider the prevailing mindset in a lot of surrounding ancient cultures at the time, which was heavily steeped in fatalism.
Like, if you get sick, it's just the gods being angry.
Precisely. If you contracted a disease, it was viewed as the unyielding wrath of the gods, or just your unchangeable, predetermined fate.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Right. You suffered, you likely died, and attempting to intervene was sometimes seen as totally futile or even hubristic, like you're fighting the universe.
But this text actively dismantles that fatalism.
Completely. By stating explicitly that the Creator hasn't manifested any disease without simultaneously creating a specific medicine or remedy for it.
It demands action.
Yes. The only exception the text carves out is senile decay.
It's getting old.
Right. The natural, inevitable breakdown of the body that leads to death.
Which, again, the text approaches with this striking level of pragmatism. It essentially argues that the biological organism, by its very nature, has an expiration date.
Yeah, we all have a clock.
But the application of medicine makes the time spent waiting for that inevitable end significantly easier to bear.
It's a profound shift from passive suffering to active management.
Okay, but before we get into the actual physical remedies themselves, the fun stuff, we really have to unpack the immense psychological tension this operating system creates.
Because there is a lot of tension.
Yeah, between the patient and the healer. There's this complex, highly debated concept in the text called tawakkul.
Which translates essentially to complete, unwavering reliance on God.
And that concept creates immediate intellectual friction. Like, I mean, if you maintain an absolute theological belief that the divine decrees every single event in the universe,
Into the microscopic level.
right, down to a pathogen entering your body and causing an illness, is the act of taking medicine like a form of spiritual rebellion?
Does seeking a physical cure imply you lack faith in the divine decree? That's the big question.
And the text doesn't shy away from this at all.
Not at all. It leans right into the controversy. It actually cites the viewpoints of early, highly pious figures who outright refused medical treatment on these very grounds.
Yeah, the sources recount stories of figures like Abu Bakr and Abu Darda.
The story of Abu Darda is deeply illuminating here.
Right, there's this moment where his companions offer to call a physician for him while he's suffering from some illness.
And he flat out refuses. He famously states, "It is the doctor himself who has made me ill."
Which is such a powerful line. He completely bypasses the earthly physician and looks directly at the prime mover, the divine decree.
He argues that he's seeking the mercy of his Lord, not some physical intervention.
So you can trace the philosophical logic there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a form of extreme ascetical stoicism.
Like if the ultimate creator, in his infinite wisdom, will this specific biological condition upon me, who am I to try to thwart it with, a distilled root or some herbal syrup?
Exactly. Another figure quoted in the text argues that even with all his accumulated knowledge and this vast pharmacopoeia, a human physician still cannot prevent what has been ultimately decreed.
So there's this profound psychological surrender happening in these anecdotes.
It is a complete relinquishing of the illusion of control.
But wait, so if the core belief of the surrounding culture, and indeed the text itself, is that God actively sent the disease, isn't seeking out a doctor a profound act of spiritual rebellion?
That's the friction.
Right. If we just stop there, the text is basically advocating for fatalism under a different name.
And that is the crux of the debate. But this is where the author of the text introduces a masterful theological and logical synthesis.
How so?
Well, the text acknowledges the extreme piety of individuals like Abu Darda. It respects them, but it definitively concludes that their path is not the ultimate model for the general populace.
It's like an exception, not the rule.
Right. The author asserts that using medicine is actually an enduring, fundamental part of the Sunnah, the lived tradition and practice of the Prophet.
Oh.
The argument is that true, authentic dependence on the divine never actually contradicts the utilization of earthly ways and means.
Which brings up the famous proverb, right?
Yeah.
The one that serves as a sort of mental shorthand for this entire philosophy.
Oh, yes. Trust in Allah, but hobble your camel.
I love that phrase.
It's the perfect distillation of the concept. I mean, you don't just leave your camel wandering loose in the middle of the desert hoping the divine will magically keep it from running away.
No, you'd lose your camel.
Exactly. You tie its legs, you take the practical, physical action required in the material world, and then you place your trust in the unseen to secure the outcome.
And the text applies this logic directly to medicine.
It does. The wise practitioner does what must be done biologically and physically. You set the broken bone, you administer the purgative, you apply the poultice.
But you do all of that with the internal understanding that the medicine itself doesn't have independent power.
Right, it functions only by the permission of the system's creator.
So, to address that earlier friction, you aren't fighting the divine by taking medicine. You're actively utilizing the specific tools the divine pre-programmed into the earth for you to discover.
Yes, seeking the cure isn't rebellion, it's actually participation.
It totally transforms the search for medical knowledge into an act of worship.
And it entirely reframes the role of the physician, too. The doctor is no longer someone trying to cheat death or, outsmart the cosmos.
It becomes sort of like a biological detective.
Exactly, painstakingly searching for the chemical and physical clues deliberately left behind by the creator.
The text drives this home with a very vivid, almost cinematic image that I found kind of terrifying.
The 99 diseases.
Yes. It describes a human being walking through life with 99 diseases, just waiting at his side.
And if he manages to dodge one, another one immediately seizes him.
Right. And if he somehow avoids all 99 through careful living and medicine, he ultimately just lapses into old age anyway.
It is a stark, almost intimidating reminder of our biological vulnerability.
You're navigating a literal minefield of 99 potential ailments every day.
But the core optimism of the text is that because the remedies exist concurrently with the diseases, You aren't walking into that minefield unequipped.
You have tools.
You have a lot of tools. Which brings us to the next logical step in their framework.
Right. If it's our duty to seek these remedies, and the remedies are part of this divine provision, who exactly are we supposed to trust to give them to us?
Because the text places immense, rigorous emphasis on the qualifications of the physician. It is definitely not a free-for-all.
Yeah, it strongly warns against quackery and incompetence. The author actually pulls from classical Greek tradition here, right? Citing the physician Galen.
Yes, Galen famously stated that an ignorant doctor visiting a man with a single fever might manage to drive out that one fever, but his profound ignorance and incorrect treatments will let two more fevers into the body in its place.
You'll end up worse than you started.
Exactly. And the inclusion of Galen there is highly significant.
Why is that?
Well, it demonstrates the intellectual cosmopolitanism of the Islamic Golden Age. They weren't isolating their medical knowledge to purely religious texts.
They were reading everyone.
Right, they were actively synthesizing the vast medical libraries of the Greeks, the Persians, the Indians. They recognized that empirical truth about the human body was valuable regardless of its geographic or cultural origin.
That cross-cultural exchange is honestly one of the most fascinating aspects of these sources. We are examining a deeply religious, classical Islamic treatise, and yet it explicitly notes that the Prophet himself utilized the services of both Arab and non-Arab physicians.
The pragmatism here is crucial for you, the listener, to understand. The text delves into the legal and ethical permissibility of seeking treatment from a dhimmi physician.
Remind us what a dhimmi is in this context.
The dhimmi was a non-Muslim citizen, usually a Christian or a Jew living within the Islamic State. And the scholarly consensus presented in the text is that going to them for medical care is entirely permissible.
But with one strict caveat.
Right. The remedies they prescribe must be halal, meaning permissible under Islamic dietary and ethical law.
Okay, so a Christian doctor could set your broken leg or prescribe some sort of botanical poultice.
Sure.
But they couldn't prescribe a tonic that was mixed with wine.
Correct. And the text makes a very sharp, sophisticated distinction here between technical medical expertise and religious jurisprudence.
Like separating the biological from the theological.
Exactly. It notes an exception. You shouldn't take religious advice from a non-Muslim physician, even if it relates to your health.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so for instance, if a dhimmi doctor tells a patient they absolutely must break their religious fast during Ramadan for the sake of their recovery, or that their illness means they need to pray sitting down instead of standing,
What are you supposed to do then?
the text advises getting a second opinion from two trustworthy Muslim physicians before you alter a religious obligation.
That makes sense. You separate the biological mechanics from the theological law, but just the overarching fact that a patient could entrust their physical survival to a physician of a completely different faith, it demonstrates a highly universalist approach to the science of healing.
They understood that the vascular system of a Muslim and the vascular system of a Christian operate under the exact same biological rules.
Which is a very modern way of thinking.
It is. It also demonstrates their internal hierarchy of legal priorities, which becomes even more apparent when we look at how they handle gender in the medical setting.
Yes, this is a point that often really surprises modern readers when they look back at historical texts.
Because of our assumptions.
Right. When we envision traditional historical societies, we typically assume the existence of this rigid, impenetrable gender segregation, particularly when it comes to the physical body and medical exams.
But that wasn't always the case.
No. The sources explicitly outline the permissibility of male doctors examining female patients and female doctors examining male patients.
Even including the examination of private parts when faced with strict medical necessity.
That is huge.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of how Islamic jurisprudence operates under the principle of darura, or necessity.
So preserving life comes first.
The preservation of human life and the alleviation of severe physical suffering are prioritized far above standard social boundaries or modesty laws.
The text isn't discarding the rules of modesty, though.
No, it's just applying a built-in override switch.
Mm-hmm.
When health is critically on the line, the lesser prohibition is suspended to serve the greater good of preserving life.
And the sources back this up with historical precedent. They cite the example of a woman named Atiyah.
Oh, her story's fascinating.
Yeah, she reportedly traveled with the military forces on 7 different campaigns, and her recognized duties included preparing food, sure, but more importantly, treating the sick and tending to the wounded men right there on the battlefield.
And then there's the account of the revered figure Abu Abdullah.
The lice story.
Yes, the lice story. He suffered from a severe infestation of nits and lice on his scalp, and it was a woman who was brought in to medically treat and delouse his head.
It just shows a highly flexible, practical application of the law.
The system has hard boundaries, but those boundaries are designed to bend immediately when human survival dictates it.
Okay, so the human physicians are authorized to treat across cultural and gender lines. But the sources reveal that these physicians weren't merely studying other humans to understand pharmacology,
No, they were looking at everything.
which introduces what I found to be one of the most compelling concepts in the whole text, the observation of the animal pharmacist.
The animal pharmacist, I love that term. The text dedicates significant attention to what it terms empirical medicine, specifically medical knowledge derived from observing animals acting purely on instinct.
The anecdotes recorded in the text, I mean, they read like a classical nature documentary.
And they really do.
It claims that when a snake emerges from its winter hibernation and finds its eyesight weakened or clouded, it will instinctively seek out and consume fennel, which restores its vision.
And based entirely on this observation of reptilian instinct, human physicians began prescribing fennel derivatives for human patients suffering from weak sight.
Just from watching a snake.
Exactly. And it catalogs several of these behavioral observations, like it notes that a fox suffering from an illness in the spring will deliberately eat specific grasses to induce vomiting and purge its digestive tract.
Which we see similar behavior in domestic dogs and cats today, right?
Yeah.
Consuming grass, which gives them zero nutritional value solely as an emetic.
Right, to make themselves throw up.
The text also claims that certain birds whose diet consists entirely of fish will, if they become dangerously constipated, utilize seawater as a natural enema to clear their bowels.
And then the anecdotes become even more hyper-specific and really geographical.
Yeah, like the swallow.
Yes. It states that if a swallow's chick goes blind, the mother bird will migrate as far as China to procure a specific plant called swallowwort to cure the chick's blindness.
All the way to China.
And then there's the male eagle, who, upon observing his mate struggling to lay her eggs, will fly to India to retrieve a specific mineral called the catamount stone, the stone of secrecy, to place in the nest to facilitate the egg's passage.
Okay, now, obviously, some of those later examples kind of blend empirical observation with folklore and legend regarding animal migration.
Sure, the India and China parts are a bit of a stretch.
But if we analyze the underlying philosophical worldview driving these observations, it is absolutely stunning.
It really is. They're proposing that nature isn't merely a passive backdrop to human existence.
Nature is a vast, pre-programmed divine pharmacy.
Animals don't attend medical schools, they don't study the humoral theories of Galen or Hippocrates, yet they possess this innate, divinely endowed intuition for complex pharmacology.
And the thesis of the text is that humans have a mandate to meticulously study this animal instinct, right? To decode the chemical properties the animals are utilizing and then adapt them for human medicine.
It is the exact foundational concept of modern zoopharmacognosy.
Say that 3 times fast.
Right. Zoopharmacognosy. That's the current scientific discipline dedicated to studying how animals self-medicate.
Like modern biologists observing chimpanzees.
Yes. Chimps carefully selecting and swallowing the rough, unchewed leaves of specific plants to physically scrape intestinal parasites from their digestive tracts.
Or macaws in the Amazon eating specific types of river clay to chemically neutralize the poisonous alkaloids in the seeds they eat.
Exactly. These 8th century scholars were essentially engaging in the exact same logic. They were documenting early veterinary and environmental science to unlock the hidden chemical keys of the natural world.
Because in their operating system, the same creator who engineered the complex anatomy of the human body also engineered the fennel, the swallowwort, the minerals, and the instincts of the fox.
Therefore, observing the natural world isn't a secular scientific pursuit, it is a direct theological pathway to medical discovery.
It perfectly bridges the gap between empirical, observation-based science and deep theological belief.
But while they were looking outward at eagles and foxes, they also possessed a profound understanding that the most heavily utilized pharmacy any human interacts with is their own kitchen.
Oh, absolutely. The text doesn't treat food merely as caloric fuel. It treats diet as the ultimate daily medical intervention.
Diet is central to their entire pathology.
The text makes a sweeping, bold declaration here. It says the stomach is the abode of disease.
It views the digestive tract as the central processing unit where the vast majority of human illnesses originate and take root.
To truly grasp why they believe this, We need to quickly translate their understanding of anatomy and physiology for you, because they didn't view the body through the lens of modern cellular biology or germ theory,
No, they viewed it through the lens of humoral theory.
which is the critical key to unlocking historical medicine.
It really is. Humoral theory was originally formalized by the Greeks Hippocrates and Galen, and extensively refined by Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna.
So what is the core idea?
The theory posits that human health is dictated by the delicate balance of four vital fluids, or humors, within the body: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
And each of these humors corresponds to specific elemental qualities, right?
Yes. Blood is hot and wet.
Mm.
Yellow bile is hot and dry. Black bile is cold and dry. Phlegm is cold and wet.
Okay, so health is the perfect equilibrium of those humors.
Correct. And illness is what happens when one of those humors becomes dominant, corrupted, or stagnates.
And where are these humors primarily generated and processed?
Yeah.
In the digestive system.
Hence the stomach being the abode of disease.
Right. And the text provides a remarkably detailed, if, slightly stylized, anatomical map of this system. It describes the stomach as being shaped like a hollow gourd with a long neck, which is the esophagus.
And then it details all the intricate plumbing that follows. The three small intestines, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the long, fibrous small intestine.
Followed by the three large intestines, the caecum, the colon, and the rectum.
The author actually cites Ibn Sina here, noting his observation that the divine engineered multiple winding intestines specifically so that the passage of food would be delayed.
To give the body sufficient time for the proper extraction and absorption of nutrients.
Exactly. But because the stomach is the starting point, the initial cauldron of this massive humoral processing plant, it's the primary point of failure.
The text argues that if the stomach becomes diseased or overwhelmed, the humors produced are corrupted.
And consequently, the blood vessels that are, in their words, watered by the stomach.
Wait, watered, like a plant.
Yeah, exactly like a plant. Those vessels carry that corrupted disease to the rest of the body.
So this anatomical and humoral understanding leads to one of the most powerful and frequently prescribed medical interventions.
Which is extreme dietary restriction. Or fasting. Right. When illness strikes, the first line of defense is often doing without food entirely.
And the physiological logic they use to justify this is incredibly sound, even by modern standards.
I mean, think about it. When a human consumes a heavy meal, the body has to divert a massive amount of blood flow and vital energy to the gastrointestinal tract to manage the complex process of digestion.
So if a patient is battling a severe fever or a systemic illness, the physician wants the body's vital energy focused entirely on fighting the disease and driving out those corrupted humors.
Not laboring to break down, a heavy roasted meat dish.
The text includes a profound quote attributed to Hippocrates and echoed by Ibn Sina on this. It says, "Food is a friend to the faculties as far as its being food is concerned, but it is also their enemy when it is perceived that it is also the friend of their enemy."
Meaning, the nutrients in the food feed the disease just as effectively as they feed the patient.
So if you're suffering from an inflammatory condition, a disease characterized by an excess of hot humors, stuffing the patient with heavy calorie-dense food is the biological equivalent of throwing logs onto a raging fire.
The text provides a wonderful, practical, historical anecdote to illustrate this concept of humoral dietetics.
A story about Ali, right?
Yes. It recounts a time when the Prophet visited his cousin and son-in-law, Ali, who was in the fragile stages of recovering from an illness.
Right.
They're outdoors, standing near a palm tree, and the Prophet is eating bunches of fresh, ripe dates. Ali, presumably hungry from his convalescence, reaches out to eat some as well.
Naturally.
But the Prophet immediately stops him, warning, "Slowly, slowly, for you are still recovering."
And shortly after, the host prepares a specialized meal consisting of spinach and barley.
And the Prophet then encourages Ali, saying, "Have some of this, for it will do you more good."
Okay, so if we run that through the humoral theory matrix, it makes perfect sense. Fresh dates are heavy, intensely sugary, and classified as highly hot in the humoral system.
They require robust digestive energy to process.
But spinach and barley are light, easily digestible, and classified as cooling and moistening.
The Prophet wasn't just offering a lighter snack, he was prescribing a highly specific, humorologically balanced convalescent diet.
Designed to cool a system recovering from the heat of illness.
It's tailored nutrition based on the specific stage of the disease.
Now, related to this, there's a very specific instruction in the text regarding patients who are in the acute, severe stages of illness. The text strictly forbids the practice of force-feeding the sick.
Yes, very strictly.
And it uses this beautifully poetic theological phrase to explain why. It states that Allah gives them food and drink.
Which is beautiful poetry, but if we translate that theology into physiological mechanics for you, the listener, why, medically speaking, did they consider force-feeding a severe patient to be dangerous?
Well, from a purely physiological standpoint, it represents a deep trust in the innate intelligence of the human body.
When an organism is battling a massive acute infection, the Constitution intentionally suppresses the appetite.
Right. The body is deliberately trying to clear congestion and stop the intake of new material.
The text understands that if a well-meaning family member force-feeds an unconscious, lethargic, or highly feverish patient, they are violently overriding a natural defense mechanism.
They overload a digestive system that has intentionally shut down to purge itself.
And thereby diverting the patient's dwindling vital energy away from the immune response and back to the gut, which can be fatal.
So, saying Allah gives them food and drink essentially translates biologically to do. The body's internal systems have recognized the crisis and are currently sustaining the organism by carefully burning its own internal fat and energy reserves.
Do not interfere with the autopilot.
Precisely. It is medical restraint born of profound observation.
But while spinach, barley, and fasting are highly recommended, the text also draws some incredibly hard, non-negotiable lines regarding what cannot be used as medicine under any circumstances.
Which brings us to the forbidden cures, where the intersection of theology and pharmacology becomes really sharp.
The most prominent and extensively debated absolute prohibition in the text is the use of wine or alcohol for medical treatment.
The author issues a bold, unequivocal declaration. Wine is a disease and not a medicine.
Which is a massive paradigm shift, because in the broader ancient world, and particularly in the Galenic tradition they were pulling from, wine was the primary foundational medicine.
Right, it was utilized as an analgesic painkiller.
A necessary solvent for extracting active compounds from herbs.
An antiseptic for wounds.
And a base for thousands of medicinal syrups.
And the text is fully aware of this historical context, right?
Yeah.
It openly acknowledges that in the pre-Islamic era, and in surrounding cultures, wine was considered a primary remedy.
However, it asserts that any perceived empirical benefits wine may have possessed were spiritually and physically nullified the moment it was designated as haram, or religiously forbidden.
But the author doesn't just rely solely on theological decree. He launches into a highly detailed physiological argument detailing the physical devastation wine wreaks upon the body to justify the prohibition.
He quotes Hippocrates at length, detailing how wine fundamentally harms the head and corrupts the intellect.
The text lists a terrifying array of side effects. It causes severe forgetfulness, sudden unexplained death, shaking palsies, facial paralysis, and apoplexy.
But the ultimate philosophical reason for the ban returns to the spirit. The text argues that the primary function of wine is to rob a human being of their intellect and common sense.
And in their operating system, if a person loses their common sense, they inevitably lose their faith.
This connects directly back to the grand philosophy of the entire system. A true cure or restoration of holistic health cannot logically be derived from a substance that is fundamentally destructive to the intellect and the soul.
The means of healing must be as spiritually pure as the desired end state of health. You cannot heal the physical body by poisoning the mind.
And the prohibitions extend far beyond alcohol.
Oh yeah. The text explicitly forbids complex medicines that utilize snake flesh soaked in wine, as well as the consumption of ass's milk or ass's urine.
Interestingly, however, it notes that camel's urine is permissible in cases of dire medical necessity.
Showcasing again that nuanced legal flexibility.
They also heavily restricted narcotic drugs like Alban, which is henbane, specifically because it induces a state of intoxication similar to alcohol.
But of all the prohibitions listed in these sources, the one that stands out as the most bizarre and hyper-specific is the absolute ban on frogs.
Ah, yes. The extensive medical warnings regarding amphibians.
I mean, you really have to picture the most terrifying, highly specific, almost surreal medical warning you can possibly imagine, and then apply it to a frog.
The text categorically classes frogs as a deadly poison. It strictly forbids killing them for the purpose of eating them or using them in any medical compound.
And why? Because the text claims that if you eat certain species of frog, your teeth will literally fall out of your head.
And it doesn't limit this phenomenon to human dentition. It asserts that if domestic livestock, like sheep or cattle, even graze on grass in an area where these frogs have simply been present,
Just present.
right, The animals' bodies will violently swell up, their natural coloring will completely alter, and they too will lose their teeth.
But the crowning symptom, the ultimate deterrent listed in the text, is the claim that whoever consumes a frog will suffer from a continuous, uncontrollable, and ultimately fatal discharge of semen until they perish from depletion.
Which is a lot.
I mean, reading that today, we have to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it, but as an analyst, you really have to stop and wonder what exact historical event occurred in the 8th century to generate that specific, terrifying correlation.
It is remarkably specific,
Mm-hmm.
but if we analyze it through the lens of modern toxicology, we can start to see the empirical shadow behind the myth.
Okay, lay it on me.
Certain species of frogs and toads do, in fact, secrete incredibly potent, highly dangerous toxins from glands on their skin compounds known as bufotoxins.
Which are defense mechanisms to kill predators.
Exactly. If a human or an animal ingests a bufotoxin, it can cause severe, violent physiological reactions. Massive hallucinations, cardiac arrhythmias, violent convulsions, and severe gastrointestinal purging.
So it's highly probable that historical physicians observed devastating cases of localized poisoning.
Perhaps involving severe swelling, bodily fluids being violently expelled during seizures, or even scurvy-like symptoms of teeth loosening due to other dietary factors present during a famine where people resorted to eating amphibians in the first place.
They observed this trauma and extrapolated these terrifying absolute rules to ensure the populace stayed as far away from the animals as possible.
Do not eat the yellow frog, or your teeth will fall out and you will suffer a fatal fluid discharge.
As far as public health campaigns go, it is remarkably effective in its terror.
But notice how the text synthesizes the empirical danger with the spiritual narrative.
How so?
Well, to enforce the medical ban, it states that the prophet, characterized by his gentleness and compassion for creation, specifically forbade the killing of frogs because he possessed the innate, divinely inspired knowledge that they were profoundly harmful to mankind.
So the medical observation is wrapped in a theological protective layer.
Exactly.
And that protective layer becomes incredibly important when we transition to how they handled the massive, terrifying epidemics of their era. This brings us to their approach to specific ailments, environmental health, and the ultimate terror of the pre-modern world: the plague.
The bubonic plague was an apocalyptic event for historical societies. The text defines the plague medically as a spontaneous putrefaction of the air.
Which aligns with the classical miasma theory of disease transmission, correct? The idea of bad air.
Yes, exactly. Long before the discovery of Yersinia pestis bacteria or the role of fleas and rats, the prevailing medical theory was that disease was transmitted by corrupted air.
What corrupted it?
The scholars believed that stagnant, foul-smelling water, the unburied bodies of soldiers rotting on a battlefield, or even, fascinatingly, the impact of meteorites falling from the heavens could cause the very air to putrefy.
And the theory held that when humans inhaled this miasma, the putrefied air would interact with and corrupt their internal humors, leading directly to the fatal, agonizing swellings. The buboes in the armpits, groin, and behind the ears.
But what is truly staggering is how they managed this disease from a public health and epidemiological standpoint.
The text lays out incredibly strict quarantine rules, which are directly attributed to the commands of the prophet.
The rule states, if you hear that the plague is in a place, then do not go there. But if the plague has already arrived and you are there, then do not try to run away from it.
If we analyze that directive through the lens of modern epidemiology, it is a flawless method of infectious disease control, implemented centuries before anyone understood the concept of germ theory.
Let's break it down. The first half, do not go there, establishes an external quarantine, preventing healthy individuals from entering a highly concentrated infectious zone and contracting the disease.
Simple enough. But the second half, do not try to run away, is even more brilliant.
Yes, it prevents infected individuals, particularly those who might be in the incubation period and acting as asymptomatic carriers, from fleeing in panic and seeding the outbreak into neighboring uninfected towns.
It is striking how perfectly these seemingly arbitrary spiritual decrees map onto highly effective epidemiological practices.
But implementing a do-not-flee rule during a horrific, agonizing plague requires immense social control.
I mean, telling a terrified populace to stay trapped in a dying city goes against every human survival instinct.
To enforce this, the text provides a profound, paradigm-shifting spiritual comfort. It declares that any Muslim who remains in the plague zone and ultimately dies from the disease is officially granted the status of a martyr.
Wow. That specific theological designation completely rewires the psychological landscape of a pandemic.
It really does. In many historical contexts, contracting the plague was viewed as a shameful curse, a sign of hidden sin, or divine abandonment. People would abandon their sick family members to flee.
By elevating the plague victim to the status of a martyr, which is the highest possible spiritual rank, usually reserved for those who die in righteous battle, the text brings immense order to social chaos.
Instead of fleeing in blind panic and spreading the pathogen, the populace is spiritually incentivized to hold their ground, care for their sick, and face the disease with the comforting knowledge that if they succumb, their suffering guarantees them ultimate spiritual victory.
They applied a similar psychological reframing to more common everyday fevers, too.
Yes, the text recounts a dialogue where a man complains to the prophet that his fever is a terrible curse.
And the prophet immediately corrects him, stating, "It is not a curse, for it purifies wrong action just as fire purifies the impurities in iron."
This operates beautifully on two levels. Medically, within the humoral framework, they viewed a hectic fever as the body's internal fire working to burn off, thin out, and purge thick, corrupted humors.
The heat was seen as a necessary, functional, purifying agent.
And spiritually, they mirrored this exactly.
Yeah.
The physical suffering of the fever was acting as a metaphysical fire, burning off the patient's accumulated sins.
The physical process and the spiritual process are in perfect alignment.
Moving from the intense to the everyday, the sources offer some fascinating remedies for common ailments as well.
Like for a standard headache caused by what they identified as cold humors, perhaps a sinus headache, the prescription is to sniff musk and consume honey.
Both of which are considered hot and dry to counteract the cold and damp.
And for severe joint pain, rheumatism, and sciatica, the text relates a story of a Jewish man who successfully cured his debilitating sciatica simply by giving up the consumption of camel meat and camel milk.
The author specifically notes that consuming heavy, rich meats is detrimental for those suffering from joint pain.
That observation aligns perfectly with modern medical understandings of gout.
Exactly. The painful buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints, which is directly exacerbated by pure-enriched diets heavily featuring red meat.
They were also remarkably focused on preventative environmental health, particularly regarding the eyes.
Yes. The text recommends actively avoiding staring at harsh contrasts, like pure black or blinding pure white, and warns against gazing directly at the orb of the sun or shining reflective objects.
But it doesn't just tell you what to avoid. It offers an active prescription. The optimal color for human eyes to gaze upon, according to the text, is green.
The author notes that green was the prophet's favorite color. It is the color associated with running water and fertility, and it's described as the color of the garments worn in paradise.
So simply gazing at green vegetation is prescribed as a medical treatment to actively strengthen the eyes and soothe the mind,
It is essentially an early articulation of the biophilia hypothesis.
which is the modern psychological and evolutionary theory suggesting that human beings possess an innate, deeply ingrained tendency to seek out connections with nature and other forms of life.
Modern studies consistently show that visual exposure to natural environments, predominantly green landscapes, significantly reduces cortisol levels, lowers blood pressure, and reduces mental and visual fatigue.
The 8th century scholars recognized that visual input directly affects physical well-being.
And this concern for the physical environment extended to the safety of the home, particularly at night. Preventative medicine isn't just about diet, it's about holistic risk management.
The text includes strict mandates to extinguish all lamps and open fires before sleeping to prevent domestic disasters,
They specifically identify a hazard they call the fawaisaka.
which translates broadly to a mouse or a small pest insect.
The text warns that these pests are drawn to the oil in the lamps and will physically pull the burning wicks out, dragging them across the floor and burning down the entire house while the inhabitants sleep.
It paints a very vivid, slightly terrifying picture of the everyday hazards of medieval domestic life. Putting out the fire prevents horrific burns and fetal smoke inhalation. It's practical preventative medicine.
Which transitions us seamlessly into one of the most sophisticated aspects of the entire text: the intricate connection between the physical body, the mind, and the actions of worship.
Because holistic health wasn't just about avoiding bad meat or putting out your lamps. It was heavily, inextricably tied to the unseen world and the physical mechanics of daily prayer.
The text dedicates profound analysis to detailing the mechanics of Islamic prayer salat, not just as a spiritual duty, but as a literal physiological medicine.
It breaks down the benefits of the 5 daily prayers into both distinct physical and deep psychological categories.
Let's examine the physical mechanics first.
Okay.
The author points out that the structured sequence of Muslim prayer involves specific repeated postures: standing upright, bowing deeply at the waist, and full prostration with the forehead on the ground.
And the text asserts that this daily, repeated cycle of movements actively relaxes the joints, provides a physical massage to the internal organs, specifically the stomach and bowels, and significantly speeds up the digestive process.
Facilitating the expulsion of bodily waste, which the text refers to as the two impurities.
It is, for all intents and purposes, prescribing a form of structured, mindful yoga to be performed 5 times a day.
The author pays special attention to the act of prostration, noting that placing the head lower than the heart is particularly effective for utilizing gravity to clear blocked nasal passages from catarrh.
And for aiding overall circulation and digestion by physically compressing and releasing the abdominal cavity.
But the psychological analysis of prayer is where the text demonstrates a truly brilliant intuition regarding human biology.
Yes, the author argues that the act of deeply focused prayer actively distracts the sufferer from their physical pain.
During worship, the mind is forced to shift through complex emotional states, moving from a fear of divine judgment to a profound hope for mercy, to a sense of uncertainty about one's fate, and finally to a deep, encompassing love for the Creator.
And the text explicitly states that this intense emotional shifting gives the inner energy the strength to overcome illness.
That specific phrase is incredible.
I want to look at that through the lens of modern psychoneuroimmunology, the scientific study of the interaction between psychological processes and the nervous and immune systems.
We know today that when a patient is terrified, isolated, and focused solely on the pain of their illness, their brain floods their system with stress hormones like cortisol.
This hormonal spike actively suppresses the immune system, increasing inflammation and making the disease worse.
Exactly. It's the fight-or-flight sympathetic nervous system locked in overdrive.
But when a patient enters a state of deep, meditative, hopeful prayer, they actively disengage that stress response. They engage the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode.
By shifting their mental focus away from the localized pain of the biological body and redirecting it toward the majesty and vastness of the divine, the patient physically lowers their systemic inflammation.
They are literally giving their inner energy, their immune system, the bandwidth and strength it needs to fight the pathogen.
The author of this text intuited the mechanism of the placebo effect and stress reduction centuries before we had the vocabulary to describe it.
The author is highly self-aware about this mechanism too. The text explicitly states that a highly skilled doctor must employ every kind of tactic to strengthen the patient's vital faculties.
Sometimes that tactic is pharmacological, like administering a poultice or a specific food, but other times the necessary tactic is entirely psychological, deliberately provoking states of joy, hope, or, in certain specific humoral imbalances, even grief or fear, to shock the system back into balance.
Prayer is presented as the ultimate, all-encompassing tool because it engages all those vital emotional states simultaneously and positively.
However, their understanding of the mind-body connection also fully embraced elements that modern empirical science outright rejects.
The unseen world was not a metaphor for them. It was a factual, active participant in human health.
The text frequently addresses phenomena like the evil eye, magic, and the existence of the jinn.
It mentions an anecdote of a maidservant who presented with darkness in her face, which the physician diagnosed not as a humoral imbalance, but as her being actively afflicted by the evil eye.
It's vital to understand that for these scholars, the supernatural was simply another layer of physics they hadn't fully mapped yet. Magic and jinn were considered factual, empirical causes of physical illness.
But what is truly fascinating is how they attempted to rationalize these supernatural forces into their existing framework of humoral biology.
Yeah.
They didn't just throw their hands up and say, it's magic.
Right. There is a brilliant debate recorded in the sources where a physician is asked if a jinn, a supernatural entity, can physically enter and possess a human biological body.
And the empirical physician dismisses the idea as total nonsense, arguing that two physical entities cannot occupy the exact same space.
But the author counters this by arguing that the jinn possess what he calls subtle bodies, composed of smokeless fire.
The author then carefully clarifies that the humors of a jinn do not physically mix with the blood and phlegm of a human being. It's as if the author is painstakingly trying to make the supernatural adhere to the strict, logical rules of galenic biology.
It reveals a profound underlying desire for a unified theory of everything. They believe deeply in logical consistency. If the jinn exist and humoral biology exists, there must be a logical, mechanical explanation for how they interact without breaking the rules of the universe.
And despite their belief in these unseen forces, they maintained an incredibly strict prohibition against relying on magical amulets or talismans.
Wearing charms specifically to ward off the evil eye or physical illness was highly discouraged, and in many contexts, strictly forbidden.
The logic there circles entirely back to the concept we discussed at the beginning, tabakkul.
The fundamental danger of an amulet isn't just that it might not work. The danger is that the patient will come to psychologically depend upon the physical object itself rather than depending upon the ultimate cause, the divine creator.
It's viewed as a form of profound spiritual distraction. You are putting your faith in a carved piece of bone rather than the architect of the universe.
Precisely. Which brings us to the final, crowning conceptual pillar of the text. To truly understand how to heal and repair the human body, the author argues that the physician must intimately understand how that body was constructed in the very first place.
The text dedicates a beautiful, deeply philosophical section to the miracle of creation, embryology, and the intricate design of human anatomy.
The author attempts to explain the absolute genesis of human life in the womb, creating a synthesis that draws heavily from specific verses in the Quran while integrating the prevailing medical theories of the era, primarily those of Galen and Hippocrates.
They lay out the stages of embryonic development in highly specific 40-day increments.
According to their model, the first 40 days consist of the drop, the mingling of the male and female fluids.
The subsequent 40 days see this fluid transform into the clot, which they describe anatomically as a piece of thick, congealed blood clinging to the womb.
The third 40-day stage is the lump of flesh, and it is at this specific juncture that theological and biological milestones merge. This is the moment they believe the divine soul was breathed into the developing fetus.
They also dedicate significant discussion to the concept of the 3 layers of darkness enclosing the fetus.
When modern anatomical scholars look back at this specific phrasing, they often correlate it remarkably well with the 3 actual anatomical barriers protecting a developing child: the external abdominal wall, the muscular wall of the uterus itself, and the delicate inner amniotic sac.
But where their theories become truly fascinating and quite complex is in their explanation of genetics and family resemblance.
Without any concept of chromosomes, DNA, or cellular division, they had to explain why a child looks like its parents using only the macrofluids they could observe.
The text puts forth what is essentially a fluid dynamics theory of heredity. It asserts that the male reproductive fluid is characterized by humors that are hot, strong, thick, and white.
Conversely, the female reproductive fluid is categorized as thin, weak, and yellow.
The text then claims that the physical appearance of the resulting child, whether it resembles the father or the mother, is entirely determined by whichever parent's fluid exceeds or overpowers the others in either volume or humoral strength during conception.
It is a battle of elemental dominance. If the hot and thick essence of the father violently overpowers the thin and yellow essence of the mother, the child's physical form is molded in the father's image.
They also pull a fascinating concept from Hippocrates to explain how the traits of the entire body are passed down. The text quotes the Greek physician's assertion that semen flows from every organ.
This is the ancient theory of pangenesis.
Right, it's the idea that the reproductive fluid isn't just manufactured in one localized area. Rather, it is a holistic, microscopic extraction of the entire body's essence.
The brain contributes a microscopic essence of brain. The liver contributes an essence of liver. The bones contribute an essence of bone.
This is how they explain why a generally healthy, robust body produces a healthy offspring, or why a specific physical defect might be inherited. Every single organ acts as a data point, contributing a tiny, vital piece of information to the reproductive seed.
It is, of course, anatomically incorrect by modern standards, but it is an incredibly beautiful, highly logical way of describing a holistic genetic contribution based on the observable data they possess.
And that deep appreciation for holistic design extends to their reverence for the anatomical structure of the fully grown adult body. The descriptions in the text border on poetry.
Their anatomy is profoundly teleological, meaning they believed every single microscopic structure was designed with a specific divine purpose in mind.
They view the body as a flawlessly engineered machine where absolutely nothing is superfluous and nothing is wasted.
They describe the physical placement of the lungs, arguing that they were created and positioned specifically to act as bellows, constantly fanning and ventilating the intense humoral heat of the heart, so that its vital energy isn't stifled by its own combustion.
They even apply this logic of divine intentionality to what we would consider gross bodily waste. They believe that every major organ system generated its own specific type of biological exhaust as a byproduct of its internal digestion of humors.
For example, the digestive processes of the liver produce the standard waste products of urine and yellow bile.
But they go further. They argue that the complex digestion occurring within the brain produces mucus, which is expelled through the nose.
The intense humoral digestion occurring in the heart and the bladder produces the physical growth of air.
And the digestion occurring within the inner ear produces earwax, which they sternly warn must be regularly cleaned, or the stagnant humors will breed worms in the ear canal at night.
The idea that the hair growing on your forearms is the literal exhaust fume of your beating heart is a wild anatomical theory. But it demonstrates an absolute uncompromising commitment to their core philosophy. The body is a fully unified, interconnected system.
Nothing happens by accident. Every biological function is a deliberate gear in a grand machine.
They even cite the specific growth patterns of facial hair as evidence of divine mercy. The author points out that the hair on a human's head grows continuously, but the hair of the eyelashes and eyebrows stops growing at a very specific, predetermined length.
The text argues that if the eyebrows continued to grow like the hair on the scalp, they would eventually cascade over the face, blinding the human being.
Therefore, the simple fact that an eyelash stops growing is cited as profound, observable proof of a loving, intentional creator.
For the author of this text and the civilization that produced it, the human body isn't just a biological vessel to be maintained. It is a sacred text in its own right.
Every branching vein, every articulating bone, every strict limitation on the growth of an eyelash is viewed as a deliberate sentence in a grand book written by the divine.
Therefore, by meticulously studying human anatomy, the physician believes they are literally studying the mind and the intentions of God.
And that profound, overwhelming sense of awe is exactly what I wanted you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive.
When we open up a text like this, it is easy to get caught up in the alien nature of it. We look at outdated humoral remedies for fevers, or strange warnings about yellow frogs, or anatomical theories about hair being the exhaust of the heart.
But if we look past the obsolete mechanics, we are looking at a civilization that fundamentally refused to separate the physical reality of human existence from the spiritual meaning of that existence.
We've traveled through an intellectual system that seamlessly and beautifully wove together the empirical observation of a fox self-medicating with grass, the strict, unflinching pragmatism of cross-gender surgical intervention to save a life, the careful daily moderation of an anti-inflammatory diet, and the profound, cortisol-lowering psychological surrender of structured prayer into one cohesive, unbreakable lifestyle.
It is a complete, holistic operating system for being human.
And sitting with that system leaves me with a final provocative thought to ponder something that wasn't directly addressed in the text itself, but feels incredibly urgent and relevant to how we live today.
What's that?
In our modern era, we have achieved absolute miracles of hyper-specialized medicine. We have mapped the human genome. We have a different, highly trained specialist for every single organ in the body. We have perfectly clean, high-resolution MRI scans that can pinpoint a cellular anomaly in an instant. But in achieving this mastery over the biological machine, we have also completely structurally separated the clinic from the chapel. We treat the strict mechanics of the human body in one sterile building, and we leave the patient to search for the meaning of their life and the meaning of their suffering in entirely separate, disconnected spaces.
We split the human in half.
While our medical technology and our understanding of germ theory are undeniably vastly superior to the humoral theories of the 8th century, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. By aggressively severing the connection between the physical reality of illness and the spiritual or psychological meaning of human life, did we accidentally lose a crucial, vital ingredient in the recipe for human healing?
In our intense, highly successful rush to cure the specific biological disease, are we sometimes entirely forgetting the human patient?
That question takes us right back to the very beginning of our discussion. It reminds us that sometimes the cleanest, most precise diagnostic scan doesn't actually show you the complete picture of human suffering or what it truly takes to make a person whole again.
And that is exactly why we look back at these historical operating systems.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep asking the hard questions, to keep looking at the whole picture of what it means to be human, and stay curious.